Our third panel of witnesses, Mrs. Lestrella, welcome to the committee, who lost family members in a car accident involving a Toyota vehicle. I want you to know that you have our deepest sympathy, and I know how tough it is when you lose a loved one. So I want to let you know thank you so much for coming. Mr. Hagerty experienced a sudden unintended acceleration in a Toyota vehicle. I can imagine, what that's like. So we want to thank you too. Imagine that experience. All of a sudden your car just takes off. I can imagine. And Mrs. Claybrook, a former administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and President Emeritus of the Public Citizens, of course, welcome. We're so delighted to have you and your experience that you could sort of share with us. Yes. And Mr. DLo, the Executive Director of the Center for Auto Safety. We are delighted to have you with us as well. And so what we would do is just start with you, Mrs. Lestrella, and just come right down the line. And we have 5 minutes, and of course, when you start out, the light is on green, and then it turns to yellow, and then, of course, then it becomes red. Red everywhere means stop. So we will start with that. Mrs. Lestrella, why don't we just come down the line? You start first. Yeah. I'm sorry. Let me close the door. I have to swear you in, too. Yeah, let me just do that. Will all of you stand, please? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? If so, answer in the affirmative. Right. Let the record reflect that all the witnesses answered in the affirmative.
Mr. Chairman, Congressman Isa, and the members of the Congressional Committee, thank you for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to speak for my 4 siblings, to testify for the Toyota recall as they relate to my beloved family who were taken prematurely away from us. I would not discuss or talk about the accident as we have heard enough. We have heard so much from the media, anywhere throughout the world. I'm here to speak for my 4 children and for the safety of the consumers throughout the world. I braved this time myself. I would like to introduce myself. I am Faye Lestrella. I am a school teacher by profession, and I ventured into the real estate business when we moved to Vallejo. Nobody knows probably where Vallejo is. That is a suburb from San Francisco, California. We moved in 1979, or 77, to Vallejo. But we were in Alameda for quite a while before coming to California. My husband was stationed in Midway Island. So I was married to Cleto Lestrella for 46 years. He was a retired Command Master Chief, U.S. Navy, for 30 years and worked for the federal government for another 10 years. We have 5 children. The oldest one was Cleophas Lestrella Sailor. Chris Lestrella, the middle of the 5, who was with them, who called and dared to call 911. As I mentioned earlier, I will not discuss the accident. So let me start with Cleophie. Cleophie, when she graduated from University of California, Davis, she worked for her immediate boss for a year in the research department. Then she worked for Carl Jean, in which she has, and I went to her experiment cell. I know I only have 5 minutes, but I'd like to mention this because she had that experiment in which we didn't mention the cotton. It was presented by the president of Carl Jean on TV. And then she worked for various pharmaceutical and technological companies. And the last one was Ambrex in La Jolla, California, in which she received an achievement award for significant technological innovations awarded to her in October 2009. Mark Wesley Saylor, her husband, was a highway patrol officer we love so dearly. He was respected, very respectful person and very caring. He was a person of honor and integrity. He was a very religious man, a devout father and husband. He gained respect from his colleagues and friends. Mark dedicated his time in life to his family and to his job. In 1997, he responded to a traffic collision in Interstate 5. He saved the life of a man who was trapped in his car, burning car, and he was awarded for that too, for his effort and for his superior act. And it is ironic, he saved someone, but he was not able to save his family from the fiery cross in Santee. Mahala Amanda Saylor. That's my 13-year-old granddaughter. She was a promising athlete. Her love for soccer and made her the team captain. Mahala was so blessed for a parent like Mark and Cleophie. After working hours, her parents would attend to her games, to her practice, to school, and to church. The week of the tragedy, my daughter Cleophie took off for a week to prepare her daughter entering 9th grade at Mater Dei Catholic School in Chula Vista. Mahala missed the invitation and the opportunity to travel as she was invited by the sports ambassador, People to People, Soccer Cup in Vienna, Austria. Knowing Mark and Cleophie, they will make an investment on their child's future. That's Mahala. Excuse me. Chris New School Estrella. His passion was basketball. He graduated at St. Vincent's St. Patrick High School. He worked for the United Parcel Service as loading supervisor. After his graduation in college at the University of East Bay, now East Bay, that was University of California, Hayward, he went into the financial mortgage business also, as we encourage because it goes hand in hand with the real estate business. So he ventured into that. While doing that, he worked for Wells Fargo Mortgage Company. While doing that, he went to school for voice acting in San Francisco, in Sausalito. Chris' voice was heard over because of his practice. And he was so composed when he was the one that called for 911, and everybody heard it. I have not heard it. I stayed away from it. I don't want to hear the rest of it. And the message was strong. He answered to the operator to hold on and pray, pray, pray. That was very great of him, the courage that he had. I know it was the four of them were on the verge of their deathbed, and he was able to call 911. And I thank him for that. On August 28, that was the tragic date that triggered us all. But we didn't hear about it until the following morning, when the law enforcement officer came to our door with a note to contact the coroner's office. And I said, oh no. How could you imagine coroner's office? And what does that tell you? So, was it only my daughter? Because I know my daughter always checks her cell, her experiments on weekends to see how they are doing. That's how dedicated she was. So when we heard from the cop that there were 3 of them, and I said, how about another person? And I was so glad that there's another person somewhere that was not with them. But then when we called the coroner's office, there were 4. Could you imagine? It's unimaginable to lose 4 people in your segment, in your sibling. So I braved this moment. So hopefully, Mr. Chairman and the committee and the different organizations, the Department of Transportation and NHTSA would do something for the safety of the world. We don't want another person, another family to suffer like we are suffering. At the time, we have a 7-month-old baby. His name is Connor Toyoka. Toyoka, my Japanese son-in-law. We were talking to him. I know he is bubbly all the time, but he would not even smile. That's how the impact of the tragedy was felt in my household. It had a big impact on my friends and family in the whole community in San Francisco area, in the San Diego area. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I know I didn't come here to cry on someone else's shoulder, but as I mentioned earlier, it is for the safety of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Estrella, for your very moving testimony. Mr. Hagerty.
My name is Kevin Hagerty, and I owned a 2007 Toyota Avalon. In the past 6 months, I've experienced 5 events where my car accelerated on its own. The first few times I experienced the car accelerating without my foot on the gas pedal, I was driving through town. The car would go back to its normal RPMs after driving a few miles or after the car was stopped, turned off, and restarted. After experiencing the sudden acceleration the 3rd time, I took my vehicle to be checked by my local auto shop. They could not find anything wrong with my vehicle. After 2 more incidents, I brought my car to a Toyota dealership on November 11, 2009 to be checked. After keeping my car for 2 days, they found no unintended acceleration problems and confirmed that the factory mats were installed properly. Then on December 28, 2009, I was driving to work on Route 78 in New Jersey. The car began to accelerate without my foot on the gas pedal. As I pushed on the brake, the car continued to accelerate. At that time, I was not able to stop my vehicle by pressing on the brake pedal. The only way I was able to slow the car down was to put the car into neutral. I got off the next exit, which was the exit for the dealership. Determined to get the car to the dealership, I showed them firsthand that this was, I wanted to get it to the dealership to show them firsthand that this was happening. I drove approximately 5 miles by alternating from neutral to drive and pressing very firmly on the brakes. On my way there, I called them and asked for the service manager to meet me outside. As I pulled into the front of the dealership, I put the car into neutral and exited the car. With the brakes smoking from the excessive braking and the car's RPMs racing, the manager entered my car. He confirmed that the gas pedal was not obstructed, the mats were properly in place, and that the RPMs were very high. They contacted a Toyota tech to come to the dealership and look at my car. He arrived within a few hours. The dealership had my car for 1.5 weeks. When I was told the car was ready to be picked up, I asked what problem they had found. I was told by the service manager that, per Toyota, they replaced the throttle body and accelerator assembly, including 1 or 2 of the sensors. Since they could not tell me exactly what problem they found with these parts and why they were replaced, I started doing some research about Toyotas online. I came across Sean Kane's name in multiple articles I read and decided to contact him. When I reached him, I explained my situation and expressed my fear of driving this car in light of what just happened. I no longer felt safe in it since nobody could explain why the acceleration problem occurred in the first place. Sean did not have an answer for the cause and was surprised that the dealership replaced parts and witnessed it firsthand. I was then contacted by ABC News, and they were interested in doing a follow-up story on accelerator problems. ABC also confirmed that ABC also confirmed with Toyota that the parts taken out of my car were sent to Toyota's corporate offices to be evaluated. I agreed to an interview mainly because I wanted to help people understand how to safely stop a car by putting it into neutral. I continued driving my car out of necessity but refused to put my children in it. About 3 weeks ago, a local dealership owner, after hearing about my story, made me a generous offer on a new vehicle, as well as offer to pay off the balance of the loan on my Avalon. For my safety, as well as the safety of my family, I took him up on this offer. I want to confirm one thing on this, on my statement, is I explained the first couple times that it happened, I was able to apply the brake and slow down the car, but I was going at a slower pace. I was going 15, 20 miles an hour through town. When I was on December 28th, when I was driving at a faster rate at 60, 65 miles an hour, I was not able to stop the car just by applying the brakes. And the only way to stop it was putting it into neutral.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Right. Thank you, Chairman.
Ms. Claybrook.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'd like my whole statement in the record because I'm not going to have time to read it.
Without objection.
Thank you. I just want to highlight a few things and try not to be repetitive of other things that have been said today. Excuse me. The first thing I'd like to mention is that I do believe that Toyota has harmed its trust and confidence of the American people, and particularly with the document that's been mentioned at this hearing. One of the things that concerns me enormously is that there are no criminal penalties in the NHTSA statute. And I'm concerned about that because the Consumer Product Safety Commission has them, the Food and Drug Administration has them, the SEC has them. In an article in the New York Times recently on foreign bribes and misleading, a company paid $400 million in penalties and has the threat of going to jail. So the penalties at this agency, which total $16.4 million maximum at this point, are way understated for the size of the companies that this agency is regulating. And so I hope that this will be something that will be taken up by the committee. And as a recommendation, I know you're not during the legislative part. I'd like to say for the people who have been victims of this, and Marcy Kaptur was very articulate about it, you know, really the only remedy that they have other than getting a new car and trying to forget the horrible experiences and loss of family and friends is a lawsuit. That's really their only remedy. That's the only way that they can individually punish Toyota. And even that really isn't a punishment because it's just a financial penalty. But it's not really a penalty for the people who made the decisions. That's the reason that I'm interested in criminal penalties. I would like to mention something about NHTSA and the revolving door. There are 28 former top officials of this agency who have gone to work for the auto companies in one capacity or another in the last 25 years. Former NHTSA administrators, several of them, former chief counsels, former deputy administrators, top engineers and lawyers of this agency have become the face and voice of auto manufacturers after they've left the agency. And they've left it way before it was time for them.
Not just Toyota, but a different company.
No, not Toyota, but
Okay.
all these companies.
Right, thank you.
Toyota has had several, but I'm talking about all of the companies. So it's not a small issue when people raise it. I just wanted to make sure that you saw the scope of that issue. There's been a discussion of Toyota's secrecy, and I just want to say that I think this has less to do with their culture in Japan than it has to do with the fact that they're an auto company. All the auto companies are secretive, and so it's an issue that is really crucial, and so is NHTSA. NHTSA is very secretive, and Clarence DeLo has filed probably more Freedom of Information Act requests to NHTSA, and Public Citizen, where I was the president, have litigated more of them than you can possibly imagine for no good reason. And I do think that that's something that this committee may want to take a closer look at, is how secretive this agency has been. One of the things that really got my goat was when I read in the October 5th filing by Toyota on the floor mat recall, October 5th, 2009, is that they claimed they were doing this, but it wasn't a safety-related defect. Please. Sudden acceleration isn't safety-related. I mean, it was so arrogant what they did, and it was so unbecoming of a company that should have much more sensitivity than that. The other action that they took, which I found very disappointing, was that they hired a litigation expert company to supposedly evaluate whether or not they have a problem with the electronics. And in fact, the whole purpose of this company is to defend manufacturers. In terms of NHTSA, I would just like to ask you to get more details about the financial information, because here is their budget document filed by the agency in this Congress. And what it shows is that of their total budget, only 15% is for motor vehicles. Only 15%. The vast majority of it, 71%, is for grant and aids to the states, and another 13% is for highway safety research. And only 15% is for vehicle safety of the total budget of this agency. And so when they say they have 66 new positions coming up, or that they're going to ask for more money, where are they going to ask for this money? Where is it going to be? And so I hope that there will be a question asked about that. The last sort of major point that I want, and by the way, this agency is the poor stepsister in DOT, because the 95% of the deaths in transportation occur on the highway, and they have 1% of DOT's budget. So it is a very grossly underfunded agency and has been for far too long. A lot has been mentioned about the event data recorders. I hope that you'll follow up on that. I don't even know whether or not Toyota has looked at the event data recorders for the crashes that you've been hearing about. Have they looked at what the event data recorder said for the crash we just heard about, or for the other 38 deaths and all those injuries? They haven't made it available easily in the United States. I'll bet that NHTSA doesn't have that data, and that would help to elaborate what actually happened in those crashes. And it wouldn't be he said, she said, it would be factual data. And then the last thing is that when the Firestone Ford Explorer debacle happened 10 years ago, the Congress passed a new law called TREAD, and in there it required early warning systems to be established by the agency, which it did do. But it keeps it all secret. This is not transparent either. All of the information is kept secret. So if you have a problem and you go to see whether or not a company has given information to the agency about that particular make, model vehicle and what the problem is, that's all you can find. But you can't get the number of consumer complaints. You can't get the number of warranty claims. You can't get the information about their field activities. So, and they don't have even have the number of lawsuits filed in that particular case. So you're really disabled. And I hope that this transparency issue will become a key concern of this committee. And then lastly, I'd just like to say that some new safety standards do need to be issued, and I've got them in my statement.
Thank you very
so
much. Thank you. Mr. DLo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sudden unintended acceleration has always been recognized as a serious safety hazard. In 1971, General Motors recalled 6.7 million Chevrolets for defective engine mounts that caused sudden acceleration. That's the fourth largest recall ever. But the early sudden acceleration recalls, they were mechanical in nature, easy to detect, easy to fix. With the advent of
Do you have your mic on?
controls,
Is it your mic up?
oh, it's open.
I want to put it a little closer.
Okay. With the advent of electronic ignition and cruise control systems in the late 70s and early 80s, we began to see complaints that didn't have a mechanical nature. They were hard to find. In January 1989, and this is a fundamental problem with NHTSA's logic, the Department of Transportation's Transportation Systems Center did a major study into sudden acceleration and concluded that absent finding a defect that could cause the throttle to open, such as a failed cruise control, it must have been driver error. And in investigation after investigation after investigation after 1990, the agency took the position that they would close the investigation without a defect determination or recall if they couldn't find a mechanical problem that caused the throttle to open. Beginning in 2001, though, the game changed with the introduction of electronic throttle controls. Complaints at the Center for Auto Safety, NHTSA and Toyota, went up fourfold. After that, NHTSA received 5 defect petitions. They opened 3 preliminary evaluation investigations and 2 engineering analyses. But none of these investigations resulted in a single vehicle safety recall. What happened, the investigations as a whole, though, show significant weaknesses in the NHTSA enforcement program, which Toyota exploited to avoid recalls until the tragic crash in San Diego that took the lives of Mrs. Lestrella's family. In the defect petitions, most consumer complaints were excluded because they were long-duration events or where the driver single defect petition resulted in any recall. In the most crucial investigation, which was engineering analysis 07010, NHTSA commissioned a study, technical study and a test at their Vehicle Research Test Center in Ohio to determine whether it was electronic controls or floor mats that caused it. We FOIA'd NHTSA for the results of that test because their conclusion was it's only floor mats. There's no EMI interference, there's no electronic control problem. NHTSA responded to that FOIA by saying they don't know how they did the test, they don't know what they measured, and they had no test data. In other words, they had nothing other than a conclusion. You know, as an engineer, which I am, you keep lab books. You enter the data, you enter the test procedure. NHTSA had nothing. And yet that report was what enabled NHTSA to do a equipment recall of the Lexus. But look at that equipment recall. It resulted in 55,000 vehicles, or floor mats. It was designed to fail. The completion rate in the recall, as Representative Issa was interested in earlier, was 40%. 60% of the mats still had never been replaced. The only other investigation that resulted in anything was a safety improvement campaign. What's that? That's not even a safety recall. It's just something where the manufacturer says there's no safety defect. We're not going to even comply with, be subject to the Part 573 and the Safety Act requirements. And so when we look at all this, from 2001 to the October 2009 format recall, which was generated by the San Diego crash, not by an investigation, not by anything else, all they got was an equipment recall, which Toyota told in its internal memo that it saved the company $100 million. The other thing that we filed a FOIA for is the early warning system. After TRED, as Joan indicated, Congress established an early warning system. It was supposed to prevent more tragedies like Ford Firestone. It didn't. We've been told there are hundreds of investigations under early warning. The agency won't even give us a list of the investigations. Now, we have a number of recommendations for moving forward to improve this process. And here's what needs to be done. For NHTSA, it needs to require all responses and investigations to be sworn. Just simply say the information in here is truthful under penalty of perjury. Not a subpoena, just a statement, an affidavit that is true. Make the early warning investigations public. Make the minutes public. Revamp and revise the NAS system so we have more crash investigations to find out what happened in crashes. And finally, they need to do a comprehensive evaluation of electronic controls and adopt safety standards, including the requirement that every vehicle have brake override. And for Toyota, we just have a few recommendations. First of all, install the brake override in all their vehicles and open up their public records in these investigations so we can see. And finally, for every consumer who files a complaint, and there's only been 2,500, give that consumer a report and an evaluation on what happened in their car and tell them what they did to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just start off the questions. Ms. Claybrook, what would, you told the committee staff that all of this seems to represent a failure of regulation. What's been wrong with NHTSA's approach to the issue of sudden unintended acceleration?
I think they lack leadership. I don't think there was an enforcement mentality. This agency is a cop. It's a policeman. It should act like a cop. Mm-hmm. And if it's not popular, that's just too bad. You know, mm-hmm. They should be a cop. And I think that there has been great improvement since Secretary LaHood took over and David Strickland. But for the past decade, there were one investigation after another closed, no real explanations. The agency is grossly underfunded. It never used any of its subpoena power. It rarely hired an outside consultant to help it. It didn't put out public alerts. 30,000 complaints that Secretary LaHood talked about. When I was there were 200,000. Why were there? Because I put out consumer alerts all the time. I asked the public to come in and tell us about things. We had 23,000 complaints on one Ford defect. And we valued those consumer complaints because that's the richest, freest information you'll ever get on what's happening on the highway. And this agency has just been, I don't know whether it's been beaten down or just didn't care, or whether, it just it didn't have any enthusiasm, but it certainly didn't have any leadership. There was no caring by the top staff of that agency that says, tell me what's going on with these, give me a weekly report. I want to know every case that's happened. I want to know the number of deaths. I want to know the number of injuries. And let's put out some consumer alerts to alert the public. And on the early warning issue, the fact that Public Citizen had to sue twice, had to sue the agency twice in the mid-2000s in order to even get just the vehicle and the make model vehicle and the problem put in the public record. It's ridiculous. This whole program was meant to be public. And if the public knows what's going on, they're going to tell you. As you've heard today, they're going to give you information that is rich and the agency should have to do its job.
You know, I'm sure you heard the testimony of Secretary LaHood. He said that they were trying to bring on 66 new employees, I assume, to follow up on some of these complaints. From what you know, Do you think that's sufficient a number of folks to bring in and to do what they need to do?
Well, no. The agency has always been understaffed and underfunded. When I was administrator
When were you administrator?
in the Carter administration,
Yes.
and when I was the administrator, we had 119 employees in the entire enforcement office. Today, there are about 30 less than that, and that's for standards enforcement as well as for defect enforcement. So there are only 18 investigators in the defects office for the whole country and all automobile defects, and there's only 57 employees just in the defects office. So the agency is not enough. But the key issue to me is how is it going to be allocated? Because as I mentioned to you, 71% of the money this agency gets now goes in grants to the states. Only 15% of that money, which is $132 million a year. That's the total budget for the entire motor vehicle program at the Department of Transportation, to do research, to set standards, to do litigation cases that they have that come up, to investigate defects, to investigate safety standards. So this agency is, I say it needs another $100 million minimally right now. And I also think that it needs to be able to impose penalties against companies in that range as well, because $16.4 million is chump change to Toyota.
Now, Mr. DLo, you said that NHTSA has relied on outdated sudden acceleration study. Is that right?
Yes.
And how do you think that's affected them? I mean, so they're not up to date with regard to that issue?
Are they, I'm sorry.
Not up to date.
Yeah, no, they're definitely not up to date on sudden acceleration. I mean, they did more in studies in 1975 and 76 than they have since since then. The only study that they did was one that was aimed at showing that it was driver error that was causing sudden acceleration, not electronics. There are twice as many vehicles on the road today, and the vehicles are 5 times as complex. The job is enormous, and the budget and their staffing and resources are down.
I see. If there is a message that you want to deliver, Mr. Hagerty, what would that be to NHTSA and you, Ms. Lestrella? What would your message briefly be?
I beg your pardon?
If there was a message that you want to deliver to NHTSA, what would that be?
Close investigation, full capacity of investigation by NHTSA.
Ms. Hagerty?
I think they need to take the investigations more seriously. I was contacted by NHTSA from Scott Yan, and he seemed very interested in my case. He also copied several other people in his agency. He also mentioned they may be interested in taking a look at my car, see if there's anything else that may be contributing to the acceleration problems with electronics, and they really wanted to dig into it, and they seemed very interested. And I never heard from him after the one conversation we had. I even sent him an email telling him that I was planning on selling my car. If you're interested in taking the car and taking a look at it, please let me know. And I never heard anything back. So I just wish they take some of the complaints very seriously, and from the dealership on up. Once they get a complaint from the dealership, to contact Toyota and take it seriously and really dig into it and find out, what the crux of the problem is and how to correct it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent that the prepared written statement of John Saylor, the deceased father, be placed in the record.
Without objection.
Mrs. Lestrada, once again, our condolences. I had an opportunity also to be asked to pass on, again, a deep regret from Bob Baker, the elderly 50-year car dealer who simply was the unfortunate owner of the dealership that provided the loaner car to your daughter and son-in-law. There are many victims that we're dealing with in this tragedy, this group of tragedies, but none touches us in San Diego more closely than the loss of your family. We are here today, I think, trying to get to the bottom of an agency's failures. And Ms. Claybrook, I'm deeply concerned that the agency that you administered back in the 70s has become complacent. And I'd like to be fair to them, and I'd like to run just a line of questioning and then talk about some of the things that should be done to revitalize it. In 1975, a study was done just before you became the administrator that estimated that about 50% of all auto accidents were alcohol-related, 93% of all crashes were directly or indirectly related to the individual drivers, and approximately 13% were mechanical or vehicle-related. And in those days, as you and I recall, a lot of cars were driving without even automatic self-adjusting brakes, and most had drums, so no surprise that vehicles were more a part of it. And there were 51,000 deaths in 1980, the last year of your administration, and that was 3.35 per thousand. Now the good news. Today, about 1/3 of all fatalities are estimated to be alcohol-related. In 2008, there were 37,261 fatalities, even though our population has grown greatly, and that's about one per 1.27, I should say, per thousand, or yeah. So call it, and about 2% of automobile fatalities are estimated to be directly related to the vehicle failures, meaning we've gone from 13% where the car is at fault to 2%. Ms. Claybrook, I believe that probably a lot of what NHTSA is dealing with is the fact that cars are simply a lot better and less likely to fail, and what Mr. DLo has said is they're also harder to find those failures when they occur. You heard Secretary LaHood earlier today answering questions about transparency of the agency, looking around the world so that this problem or problems that had been detected and changed differently in Japan, detected and dealt with in Great Britain sooner than in this country, and had they been done, no doubt in my mind, your family would still be alive. Do you believe, first of all, that the Secretary is going to be able to make those changes within the budget and the present constraints, if you will, of the law, and if not, what we need to do to help him make those changes?
Thank you so much for your question, Mr. Issa. There's a lot of information in what you said.
Well, I don't want to mislead people. Cars are safer, but they're not as safe as obviously they could be if the agency you once shepherded was doing a better job.
And there are also different things. For example, there are 10,000 rollover deaths a year that virtually didn't exist when I was the administrator, because we didn't have SUVs and as many pickup trucks.
We had long gas lines then, too.
Well, I issued the toughest fuel economy standards you'll ever see, and Lee Iacocca can tell you that. Yes, there has been a reduction in deaths and injuries, and it's actually a little bit lower right now because of the recession. If you look at the economy and deaths on the highway, they sort of track each other. But I think that the vehicle safety standards that we have, particularly airbags and seat belts, now that are used by the vast majority of the public, the belts, have made a huge difference in the safety, and the campaigns that have been launched and the laws that have been passed on drunk driving have made a huge difference in that area, and those are big issues. I still think that there are a lot of issues that haven't been addressed in terms of safety standards, and then we have in the defects area, for example, in the Ford Firestone case, there were over 200 deaths in that. I believe that the 34 or 39 deaths we know about now in the Toyota case is probably going to triple by the time all the information comes in, because a lot of people don't tell you that it happened. In terms of big changes, I think that the agency needs a lot more money. It has, I think, a meager budget for the work it's required to do, and as I said, I think it needs $100 million more. And I know that that's maybe pie in the sky, but I think that that ought to be the goal fairly soon. Secondly, the agency collects data in a very old-fashioned way. It collects data by doing accident investigations, SWAT teams, as Mr. Toyota said, but they were supposed to collect huge numbers of crash data, maybe 20,000 crashes a year. They're now only under the funding able to collect 4,000. The reason I focus so hard on the event data recorder, the black box, is because the black box could be not only the liberator of information about what happens in particular crashes, it could become the data source for the agency, and very inexpensively, because it's quite accurate, and so it should be mandatory, it should collect a lot more data, and that data should automatically go to the agency. And if it did, then they could take that $20 million they now spend on crash investigations and do analyses and fill in little gaps. So there's some very special things that this agency should do right now, and I believe that that my testimony also elaborates.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I would ask, just to be able to ask a question for the record very briefly, Secretary LaHood was, let's just say, not completely prepared to answer the questions related to when we do a recall, how few actually in the ordinary course get implemented versus people get the letters, they don't see the significance, and they get lost. Would you answer for the record your view of obviously then, now, and how we could change that?
Well, it's about 75%, 74%. That's the best. We never have 100%. The newer the car, the cheaper the fix, the more likely there is to be a recall, and the higher the returns are, except in examples like this, which are so unusual, where people are scared to death, so they bring the car in to get it fixed. The agency does get quarterly reports, quarterly reports for 6 quarters after a recall is announced, so it knows what the progress is of the company in getting these cars fixed. And it can extend that. It can also require the company to send out a second letter. It can also require them to do advertisements and other things like that to publicize it if it's particularly needed. I think that one of the key issues is how the letter is written to the consumer. And when I was administrator, I reviewed all those letters, and they had to say, alert, safety, you know? Now they're sort of smudged down, and so that they don't, as some people say, they don't scare the consumer. I want to scare the consumer. I want them to bring that car in and get it fixed. So, and it's also how the dealer reacts to it. Sometimes the dealers are underpaid. And when they're underpaid, then they make that the last thing that they do. Sometimes the manufacturers don't make the parts on time. So the letter goes out and you can't get your car fixed for 6 months or 4 months. And so people then don't do it. So there are a lot of factors, and I think that there was an investigation by the Inspector General of DOT in 2004. I would commend that to you to look at, in which he talked about this process, the early warning system, and getting the defects office activated. And I think that maybe another IG report on what NHTSA is doing and could do to enhance the repairs of these vehicles would be very worthwhile.
Thank you. It meant that for the record, but thank you.
Thank you very much, and let me also again thank you so much for your testimony. Let me begin by asking you, Ms. Claybrook, and also Mr. DLo. NHTSA missed many warning signs regarding sudden unintended acceleration. Further, it appears that the agency was caught completely by surprise when Toyota began a series of recalls. I thought these problems were solved after the Ford Firestone fiasco, but clearly they were not, according to this. What specific changes must be made at NHTSA so we don't see this again?
Well,
is it a resource issue, or is it a lack of commitment, or it's they just hope that things will just sort of go away and they won't have to deal with it?
Well, I think it's a wonderful phrase that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And I think there are some changes that could be made, but I think it's a leadership issue. I think it's whether or not there's an interest by the administrator and the secretary and an insistence that this part of the agency be well funded and that there be weekly reports on exactly what's going on with all the defect cases they have so that the administrator knows that some cases have been pending for 2 and 3 years or they've been closed without a really good explanation for why they were closed. So I think that part of it is administrative. Part of it is transparency. If this stuff was all up on the internet, if it was easy to find, their web page is disastrously difficult to use. The early warning system doesn't even summarize things for you, so you have to spend hours digging through it to try and find anything out. If the agency helped with the transparency so that a person like Mr. Hagerty, who has a problem, could go easily to their web page and find out if other people had that problem, then there would be the ability of the citizens to push harder as well. And also the Congress would know. You know, your staff could check it every week. What's the progress of this agency in doing its job? So I think transparency is a huge issue. I think criminal penalties are a big issue because that puts an incentive to the manufacturer not to get caught and have to go to jail. And when executives know there are criminal penalties in the statutes, they behave differently. And I think there needs to be a heavier penalty and there needs to be better funding.
In addition, the agency used to publish monthly press releases on all the pending investigations that went out to the media with a summary of each one. They need to redo that again. The agency used to make public the names and addresses of consumers so you could contact them and get information like, were the floor mats in your car? There's a checkbox on a complaint form for the manufacturer to get a complaint, but there's no checkbox on that form for the consumer to make the entire complaint public.
We'll make that clear. This is a form filled out by the consumer. And so they would say, yes, it's okay for you to make my name public. They now say it's okay to send it to the manufacturer. But here they'd have to say it's okay to make it public. And then, as Clarence says, we could have called Mr. Hagerty or whatever and found out whether he had formats.
There's case after case in the early days where we got expanded recalls by going to the consumer and rebutting the information that the manufacturer had put in. And the only way to do that is to talk to the consumer. But if you can't get to the consumer, you can't do it. There needs to be a restoration of that check function of the outside public to look at what the agency is doing. The agency wants to operate behind closed doors. And one other thing is minutes. They have minutes of meetings with the manufacturers where the only thing you see are the list of the attendees. They should be required to have detailed minutes of what went on behind closed doors with the manufacturer in investigations.
Right. Let me ask you this. In response to a letter I sent to Toyota regarding the possible causes of sudden unintended acceleration, Toyota cited a report, of course, as to why it did not believe that an electronic malfunction is to blame for sudden acceleration. Is this a serious study, and do you think its methodology proves that the sudden acceleration problem is not caused by an electrical malfunction?
Is this the Exponent report?
That's correct.
Right. Well, I don't think it's a serious study, and Toyota has now said that it's an ongoing study. This is not a company that I would go to if I were seriously interested in trying to find out the answer to a problem. This is a company that Toyota went to justify what it did, and that's the purpose of this company. That's what it does.
Why wouldn't you go to? Why?
I don't know why they did it. I guess they were in a defensive mode. And normally what this company does is it protects companies that are sued in product liability litigation. That's the purpose of this company, and a large part of it. And so that's what it was attempting to secure, was justification for what it had done. If it was really seriously interested in a fresh approach and a fresh look, I think it could have gone to a lot of other people in the United States, including Mr. Gilbert, who testified yesterday.
General Motors once hired the same firm to do an analysis of fuel tank fires in some GM vehicles, and they did such a misleading analysis that the president of General Motors had to make an apology for the fact that the study was misleading, that they didn't intend to mislead the agency, but in fact they did.
Wow. Yeah, then I can understand your response, Ms. Claybrook.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. But let me just say to you, too, Mr. Hagerty, and to you, Ms. Lestrella, you know, when I hear the situation that occurred, I mean, this is the reason why it's just so important that we really continue to push to make certain that this is corrected. Because listen to you in terms of losing family members, and you in terms of Mr. Hagerty, that must have been some experience when you have a car accelerate on you like that. And then you receiving that phone call, Mrs. Lestrella, I can imagine, you know, how you felt at that time, you know. But so we want to let you know that we're going to stay on this and continue to see what we can do to try and get to the bottom of it. And thank you again, Ms. Claybrook.
Would I be able to make a comment?
Yes, you go ahead.
Okay. Regarding the acceleration as far as the sticky pedal, I just want to make a note that the first or second time that it happened, I was able to slow down the car and I stopped it. You know, I turned off the engine and turned it on again to reset itself. And when I brought it to the dealership after that day, driving to work, you know, when I was driving to work when it was accelerating and I couldn't, the only way to stop it was putting it into neutral. they really didn't know what the problem was, and they never determined that it was a sticky pedal or it was a defective pedal. I would probably been okay with that if they said, here's the problem, we found it, this is defective, we fixed it, but that's not what happened. They put, an accelerator pedal in, a throttle body, and replace the sensors and send them out to be tested. And I don't think they even knew themselves. And they had the car for a week and a half. They brought specialists in, and I just really, my heart don't feel that they knew exactly what the problem was. And if it was a sticky pedal or if it was stuck in any way, I believe, and you'd have to talk to the mechanic, but I believe he had spoke to some other people that he turned the car off and then it reset itself. So just by knowing that information, I just hope they look into that as well as one for my car particularly. I hope they look into that and make sure that maybe just
Thank you.
take a look at that seriously.
Congressman Chafee, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief question. There was some discussion about Exponent, the company, and they were evidently the organization used to investigate the Columbia crash, the space shuttle. Do you care to comment on that? Are you suggesting that they have that same type of reputation and that investigation was flawed?
I don't know anything about that, so I can't answer that question. I can only say that that in the automobile area, where I do know something about them.
I mean, you just kind of tore a company and their reputation apart, and yet you're willing to give them the deference on the space shuttle?
I'll take your criticism and limit my comments to automobiles.
Yeah, in the automotive area, they've done a half a dozen major defects where they've come in and found that there's no defect, even though there's been a recall in many of the cases.
Is there any reason to think that they're any different on space shuttles versus aircraft? What's
Well, they probably have different people working on them, and they may be different if they're working for
How
the
big a
government.
company do you have? I mean, I just don't know. How big a company is
It's a
this?
pretty big company, and it may have a different mode of operation when it's working for the government than when it's working for manufacturers.
So you'd question what their motivation was kind of behind the scenes. What are you suggesting that we should go back and reconsider the work that they did in other areas, or?
Well, I don't know that you want to do that, but I
mean, that's a pretty serious allegation. It's
my
a
allegation
pretty big
is-
disaster in the history of our country. So,
I have no idea, as I said to you, about the space program. I have no idea at all.
and so going back to what you do know, is that from your own firsthand experience? And
Well, that's from my reading and understanding and talking to lots of different people and knowing a lot about what the agency's done and what they've said about these defects and looking at cases.
would you be willing to share with the committee the people that you have garnered this information from, so that we can further investigate why we would be so critical, why we should question their
Well,
integrity?
You probably don't know, but I just retired as the head of Public Citizen, and I sent 450 boxes to George Washington University of every file that I ever had on auto safety to start a new library there. So, and they're piled up in some room out near Dallas Airport. So I don't know that I could supply you with much of anything. Maybe Clarence, however,
Yeah.
who is still working in his job and has
You
files.
bring a wealth of information and perspective that
Yeah.
many of us don't have.
Well, maybe we
We're
could
brand
do it-
new to this, so.
Well, maybe we could do it together, and Clarence could pull from his files. I have nothing.
Yeah,
to-
I would be glad to submit for the record a book by a retired professor from Yale, Leon Robertson, who looked into a number of different cases where that failure analysis was involved in. And I think that's much broader than just the automotive area. But I personally have looked at their reports on Firestone tires, their reports on GM fuel tanks, and several other automotive investigations, and I'd be happy to provide information on those.
I think this committee would appreciate your helpful input. I mean, you're two very credible witnesses giving us a perspective and calling into question the very core of the integrity of people who we've relied upon for some of the biggest disasters in our country. So to the extent that you can further help the committee with your insight and perspective, at least guiding us and giving us direction or documents that you may be aware of, when you have a company that is borders has questionable conduct and integrity, I don't know that you necessarily draw that well. They're really good on space shuttles, and we appreciate your testimony and perspective, and I guess that's why we bring it up. It's a serious charge, and we'd like to explore that further. I think we'd be negligent if we didn't. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back his time, and I now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I had a representative of Toyota visit with me in my office to deliver this exponent report. I noted a couple of things when I looked at it. One is that it was exponent was retained in December 2009 to look into these reports and claims of unintended acceleration. December 2009. Now, they looked at, over a period of 1, 2, 3. It looks like they focused on 3 years and looked at 3 different kinds of models in 3 years.
It was a very small sample.
I just want to point out the sample they took was very small. It'd be interesting to pair that sample up with the complaints that came in to see if there's any similarity. And, none of us are interested in smearing anybody here, but if a company has a reputation, according to LATimes.com, California engineering firm is known for helping big corporations weather messy disputes. Okay, well, Toyota has more than a messy dispute. I want to submit this LA Times article for the record.
Without objection.
And
so ordered.
I'm more interested in, this issue I raised before about why did Toyota order a software design in 2005? Now, Mr. DLo, I read your testimony, and you heard the presentation that Toyota made. Is Toyota's representations that it's unlikely that it could have been an electronic throttle control, is that credible based on the information that you've seen, that you've studied at the Auto Safety Center?
No. What we have done is we've examined the complaints that have come in.
Could you speak closer to the mic?
I'm sorry. We've examined the complaints that have come in, and when you have a complaint that comes in and there's no floor mats in the vehicle, there's no sticking gas pedal, and the driver clearly has a foot on the brake to the extent that the brake system is scorched and trying to stop the vehicle, what else is there other than electronics?
Right. Well, see, that's the thing when Mr. Hagerty, when your prepared testimony, when you brought your vehicle in and it was still running to the max, you had it in neutral, they checked it out, it wasn't a floor mat, it wasn't the pedal, and then they determined that it was the electronic throttle.
They don't. They're not sure.
Well, they don't necessarily admit that.
They replaced a bunch of
they
parts.
Replaced
they didn't. They never got back to me and said we know what the problem was. All they kept coming back with was per Toyota. They told us to replace these parts.
See, so I have to tell you,
they don't know, and that's why I didn't feel comfortable taking it.
Mr. Chairman, this whole hearing, which has been a very important hearing, I feel like we're trying to. We're still at the point of trying to grasp smoke here.
Well, not only that.
Because hold on, Ms. Claybrook, because I don't think Toyota has been forthcoming. I think that they've made it's good that Mr. Toyota was here. That was remarkable. But I don't think they've been forthcoming. They seem to have blinders on about this issue of electronic throttle control. For whatever reason. Could be liability. Could be that there's a link to a cover-up. I don't know, but the thing doesn't fit here. If you have a missing piece when you're doing an investigation, you have to keep asking questions. So, Mr. Chairman, despite the fact that this committee has put in a very long day here, I'm thinking that there's going to need to be a follow-up where we'll sift through the testimony, we'll look at all the evidence that we've gathered so far. We may have to take one more crack at this because the testimony by Toyota officials doesn't square with evidence that has been produced to this committee and doesn't square with evidence that is available to experts in the automotive industry. Now, Ms. Claybrook, you wanted to make a comment.
Well, I just wanted to add to your collection there, which is that they're also putting this electronic brake override in the vehicles.
Speak closer to the mic, okay?
I'm sorry. They're also putting the electronic brake override in the floor mat recall vehicles. There are two recalls. The one with the sticking pedal is low impact, low speed generally. But the floor mat recall, which most people don't believe is a floor mat because it just doesn't make a lot of sense. In most of those vehicles, they're putting the brake override. And they're putting the brake override, it's an electronic brake override to override the accelerator, throttle. And that's an electronic software change that they're making. And so you're still going to have the problem, perhaps, of having a accelerator that slams to the floor, but you're going to have a brake override which will stop it. Now, normally, if it was a floor mat problem, you fix the floor mat. Why are they putting the brake override in addition? They say they're doing it
exactly.
for the
Mr.
comfort
Chairman,
of the people.
My time has expired, but I just want to say thank you for your diligence in pursuing this, Mr. Chairman Towns. I also want to finally express my condolences to Mrs. Lestrella and your family for the suffering that they've endured, and to all those who are watching and trying to determine will their families be safe. Our job is a very serious one to pursue this, and I want to thank each and every one of the witnesses for their presence here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me also thank all the witnesses, and really appreciate you being here, and to say to you that safety is the issue that we're really pursuing here, and thank you for helping us to do that. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
This committee is adjourned.